want to share a little bit about the why. So what we asked, like, why in God's name are you doing this? So wanted to share that story, the brief version of it. So my grandfather was an officer in the U.S. Navy, and he was one of the first officers in Hitler's bunk at the end of the war, and was a big part of rebuilding Germany after the war. And what he realized when he saw the amount of pain and destruction that happened during World War II is he said, I want to make it my goal to prevent World War III. And the only way we can do that is we figure out ways for people to come together as human beings, to see each other as human beings. And we're not doing that as tourists. We're not doing that through traditional work. We need to find ways to build that into our global culture. And he went on to work for President Kennedy and to create the original idea for the Peace Corps, which was that core idea about how do we connect people across cultures. And then ran the Aspen Institute for 25 years, which was again about how do we connect people across cultures who share a purpose, who share something that they want to see, that they want to change in the world. And I'm really sad that he's not here, but I'm also really glad that he's not here, because if he saw what was happening in Washington, D.C. right now, he would be absolutely horrified. And to see that the Peace Corps is at risk, one of the greatest institutions I think our country has ever made is at risk, is absolutely like horrifying to me. And if he had seen that, I just don't even know how he could have it just would have been devastating. So I've spent my career really in his footsteps trying to really figure out how do we for the next generation build connection? How do we help people find that connection at a human level? First through the pro bono service movement, which I started about 25 years ago out of San Francisco, really helping business and nonprofit professionals come together in a meaningful way. Then by really advocating for the science around purpose and connecting people in the workplace to truly know each other, to build an actual human relationship and do this weird thing called making friends at work, which apparently I'm not supposed to do, but I was like, screw that, we're making friends at work, and we're gonna do it on a massive scale. And then, after sort of doing those two movements, I was completely burnt out, to be honest, took a year off, and really, when I turned 50 last year, took a moment and stepped back and said, what is it I want to do with the next decade of my life? What do I want to dedicate the next decade of my life to? And there's really two answers to that. One was personal. I turned 50. We've got kids, including my son, who will soon be going to college. Hopefully Michigan, but we don't know what's going to happen. And
do what you want to do.
Do what you want to do. Go blue. And he knows he can go anywhere he wants.
Ohio State.
No, that he's not doing. He can't join Al Qaeda and he cannot go to Ohio State. Those are the two rules. So, where was I with that? So, what I was realizing was that I had spent so much time being a parent and working that I had so underinvested in my relationships. And I was at a retreat, and the guy who was running the retreat said, "What is it you most want in the world right now?" And the answer was so clear to me. Like a lot of people had to think about it. I said friendship. I don't have the friendship that I want in my life, and I need to figure out a way, because I know my 50s are going to be about friendship. If I don't invest in that, I'm not going to have a good decade. Like that's what their 50s are about, is about reinvesting in friendship. And I was like, I want to do that. And then he said, whatever it is you most want in the world is what you need to give. Whatever it is you want in the world, you need to give. I was like, well, I can be a good friend of friends, but how do I help everyone in the world become friends? How do we help do this on a much bigger scale? Because I do love having friends, but I'm an idiot and I like to do things at scale. So that was one inspiration. I think the other was I stopped and said, what is the biggest problem in our country right now? What is the number one problem in our country? And it, again, was so obvious. The decline in connection and trust in our society is the number one issue in our nation, and yet there's almost no recognition of that. And when people hear it, they're like, oh, no shit, of course it is. But that's not how we're talking about it. And there is no real national leadership around this issue. We've got all kinds of leadership around different issues. We have no organization that's taking responsibility and figuring out how do we solve for social connection and trust at scale and at a systems level. How can we not have that when it's the number one issue in our country? So that was what inspired me to create the U.S. Chamber for Connection, with the idea that we need to be that organization. And the initial work around it, because we know that's a big ass aspiration, right? To reverse the decline in connection and trust. This is a very big, hairy, audacious goal. We need to shrink it down to what is our first step? And the first step, when we looked at the research, was super clear, which is that most people don't change a whole lot. We're pretty resistant to change. But the one exception is when we're in transition. When people are in transition, they're open to change. And when it comes to connection, The one that matters most is when you move. Because you're leaving behind your friends, you're leaving behind your family, and you've got to rebuild that. And that is the opportunity we have. The people, when they move, 12 million Americans a year. The average American moves 12 times in their lifetime. 60,000 people move to Seattle every year. This is a population where they're open to change, and if we can change them, and we can engage everyone else in changing them, we have a shot at actually changing Seattle. We have an opportunity to change the state, we have an opportunity to change the nation, and we have an opportunity to change the world. And it just begins with the simple idea of just helping people feel connected to each other and letting go of judgment and instead like embracing the love for each other. And as I started talking to people, there was just so much enthusiasm for that idea because it is the biggest issue and the solution is so simple. So I was so inspired today to spend 4 hours with a group of newcomers and people who thought of themselves as newcomers. For 4 hours, we spent time talking about what is the world of connection they want to build in Seattle. It was not an activity fair. We were not lecturing at them. We were having them sit down and they were actually doing the personal work to think about who do I want to be my best self in Seattle? How do I live my best life in Seattle? And how do I recognize that relationships are at least 70% of what's going to make that successful? And helping them actually design that, help us support each other, and recognizing that they're on a journey to make that happen. So I was just so incredibly inspired by people today having the courage to show up and say they want to do this work, by the incredible volunteers. We've had, I think, 150 people sign up to volunteer. There are so many people who want to be part of this movement because I think they see it in their own lives. They see the desire to actually connect with people. They see that if we don't address this, we're fucked. Like straight up, we're fucked. And there is nothing more important than we can do right now than figure out how to do this. So I just want to thank everyone for being part of this movement.